In part 1, you heard about how my in-laws left for Africa and the strained relationship I had with my mother-in-law. Now I'll continue to tell you how this trip to Africa would impact the rest of our lives. By now, we were on our way to our vacation destination, where our honeymoon could finally begin. We had a few hours left on the plane, and Amir was peacefully asleep, so I decided to take a nap as well. Suddenly, Amir started screaming, drawing the attention of everyone around us in the crowded plane. He jumped up and began yelling at everyone nearby. I was completely confused and started to panic. Why was he acting this way? The flight attendants intervened, calming him down, and he returned to his seat. I felt embarrassed and asked him what had happened. He explained that it felt like someone was attacking him, but he couldn't do anything about it. This had happened repeatedly, and he was fed up with it. Once we landed in Bali, a taxi took us to the hotel. The hotel was beautiful. The view, the pool, the restaurant. Everything was stunning about this place. We had a delightful first day and went to bed exhausted, if you catch my drift. However, as I fell asleep, the nightmare began again, waking me up to Amir's screams. I looked beside me, and it felt like someone else was lying there, despite seeing Amir. It was clear that something or someone had taken possession of him. Terrified, I tried to follow him, seeking help from the receptionist, but I couldn't stop him, and he left the hotel. The receptionist assumed we had a disagreement and calmly said, "He'll be back shortly. Go back to your room." I returned to my room and didn't sleep the whole night. The next morning, Amir still hadn't returned. I called my parents for help, but nobody answered. Imagine being on your honeymoon and your husband suddenly disappears. At the reception, they suggested involving the police. I had to wait in the lounge until the police arrived to hear my story. Suddenly, I saw Amir walking in a confused state. He stared ahead as if he were lost. I ran to him, and the receptionist followed. Offering water, we asked Amir what had happened and where he had been. Amir stared ahead as if we weren't there, and, after 5 minutes, responded, "Shantal, I don't know what's happening, but I see and hear voices in my head." Well, Black Horror Stories followers, I booked the next flight home with Amir. By then, I had reached my parents, and once we landed, they picked us up and took us to their home. We didn't sleep at our place, but stayed with my parents. They sought help from a family pandit, a Hindu priest. After the pandit's intervention and a special drink for Amir, I noticed a clear improvement. Before we continue, please hit the like button. It helps us grow. Let's continue. After a week at my parents' place, we returned to our own home. As we entered our street, an uneasy feeling washed over me. When we parked in front of our house, I looked at the front door. It seemed cold and eerie. Inside, the house was freezing, so I turned on the heating and started unpacking. Weeks passed, and my in-laws had returned from Africa. We were glad as we hadn't heard from them during that time. They weren't aware of what had happened in Bali, so we decided to visit. They welcomed us with various African goodies. Besides delicious food, there were strange figurines, apparently normal in Africa, and we accepted them happily. Eventually, we shared what had happened in Bali, but oddly, my in-laws didn't react. They continued happily with their vacation stories. Strange, right? Hungry, I decided to serve myself food when my mother-in-law approached and said she had cooked something special for me. "Hey dear, I made this pot just for you because I know you don't like a lot of pepper. This pot is very mild." I was pleased, thinking my mother-in-law finally accepted me as her daughter-in-law. With a smile, I served my food, and after a delightful meal, Amir announced that we would head home. When he mentioned leaving, his mother held him back and handed him the spare key to our house. I looked at how she handed over the key and found it strange. How did my mother-in-law get my spare key? After all, I had given it to my sister-in-law, Shivani, not her. A few days later, the drama returned to our home. Amir was off and away due to work, and I was mostly home alone. When I slept, I saw a large shadow approaching, a clear male figure. This shadow constantly tried to strangle me. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed and couldn't scream. Eventually, when it released me, I woke up sweating, and strange things continued happening in our house. Sometimes, heavy footsteps. I heard someone calling my name, but when I told Amir, he got angry. He even pushed me once. Tired of my stories, according to him, it seemed like Amir was slowly changing. Every time I asked him something, he responded angrily, eventually resorting to hitting me. People never accept this, because what I had to endure next was no joke. Amir hit me for every little thing, and we drifted further apart. I was trapped at home, almost cut off from the outside world. He confiscated my phone and took my keys when he went to work. I couldn't leave, and the front windows of our house were not open enough for me to climb out. I was so sad. This was 2 months into my marriage. How could life change so much in 2 months? My life turned into a true hell. My husband hit me. Every night, the shadow bothered me in my sleep, and I constantly heard footsteps in the house. I was terrified in my own home. One Saturday evening, Amir came home with friends. He had called that they would come over later that night and asked me to prepare food. I did, and when they arrived, Amir and his friends started eating. It turned out one of his friends was celebrating a birthday. Amir called me over, and as I stood next to him, he said with a smile, "Hey buddy, it's your birthday today, and I haven't given you a gift yet. Here, please, have fun with her." And he pushed me towards his friend. Black Horror Stories followers, my husband grabbed my hand, threw me to his friend, and said, "Have fun with her." I didn't know what was happening, and it all happened very quickly. I think my body went into survival mode because I can't remember everything. His friend stood up, grabbed me, dropped his pants, and asked the other guys if they wanted to have a good night. And the other friends gathered around me. That night, I was abused by his friends. My husband sat on a chair, watching as a cloth was stuffed into my mouth to silence my screams. Tears streamed down my face, and he didn't care. Amir watched as his friends had their way with me all night. I felt nothing. My body hurt, and I couldn't stop crying. When they were finally done with me, they left me lying on the ground like a piece of trash. Amir stood up, walked towards me, and said, "If you ever tell anyone about this, I'll kill you and your family." I closed my eyes and fell asleep on the living room floor that night. Slowly, I opened my eyes, feeling only cold around me. My body ached as if a horse had trampled over me. I could vaguely recall moments from the evening, but Amir's cold glares haunted me to this day. I got up slowly and limped upstairs to the bathroom, where I screamed to release the pain. I cried while washing myself, scrubbing so hard that I left wounds. The worst part was that I had nowhere to go. Everything was closed off to me, and I had no contact with the outside world. Besides, I was afraid of Amir. I didn't want to go to the room, so I grabbed my blanket and hobbled to the attic. There, in the darkness, I hid, contemplating how to move forward. Where could I go? How could I reach my parents? Lost in thought, I fell asleep and was suddenly grabbed by my legs. I screamed, thinking it was Amir, but when I opened my eyes, no one was there. The attic reeked, a stench like rotting meat. The smell was so strong that I vomited. I vomited so much that it hurt, and the terrible smell made me retch repeatedly. Then, I heard familiar footsteps coming up the stairs. They were Amir's, and I became scared again. He approached me, saying, "Hey, sweetheart, go shower and change. We're having dinner at my parents' place," and reached out his hand to help me up. I slapped his hand away, saying I wasn't going anywhere. I asked him why he did this to me, but Amir didn't respond. All he said was, "Fine then, I'll say you're sick," and turned away. Eventually, I heard the front door close and the key turning in the lock. Amir didn't come home for 2 weeks, leaving me alone without food and necessities. Fortunately, we had a well-stocked pantry, but it was running out. Every night, something in the house bothered me, and the rotten smell now pervaded not just the attic, but the entire home. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, and I ran to the window, where I saw my parents, grandma, and brothers. I was so happy to see them that I cried and screamed that I couldn't leave the house. The windows upstairs had locks, and the ones downstairs couldn't open fully. My brother loosened a paving stone and threw it at my front window. Both my brothers climbed inside immediately, and once inside, they were shocked by what they found. My brother went back to the window, shouting that no one should come near the house. One of my brothers vomited due to the smell in the house, and my older brother immediately realized that something was wrong. He asked where Amir was and how I had lost so much weight in 2 months. For the first time in days, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw how emaciated I had become. My ribs were visible, along with all the bruises and belt marks on my back. My brother said, "Get dressed, put on something warm, and grab your things. You're not staying here a minute longer." I looked at my older brother and told him that I didn't dare to go upstairs. I told him there was something up there, a ghost, something not right. I didn't know, but a man was bothering me every night, I told him, crying. My brother grabbed a coat, saying we needed to leave the house as quickly as possible. He ran upstairs and threw everything he saw of mine into trash bags. While they packed, we suddenly heard heavy footsteps coming down from the attic. My brothers looked at me, and suddenly, we heard voices. My brother went to check, but couldn't find anyone or anything. He grabbed me and said we had to leave now. Whatever haunted this house seemed angry. We heard various noises, but saw nothing, and the smell of rotting flesh became more intense. It seemed like someone was growling with aggression. I was so scared that it would harm us, but my brother held me tight, saying whatever it was, don't let it drive you crazy. I was so weakened that I could barely stand on my own. My brother carried me downstairs, and upstairs, we only heard banging on the walls and growling. Through the kitchen window, my brother called for my father to get me out. My father caught me on the other side, and my brothers climbed out, coughing. When my parents and grandma saw me and heard the story about the rotten smell in the house, My grandma immediately said it was a demon. I had no strength to talk or walk and fainted. My brothers, parents, and grandma were so angry. All they said was, "What have they done to you, girl? What have they done?" My older brother was so furious that he decided to drive to my in-laws. They lived just 10 minutes away from Amir's house. How come they didn't notice anything and never came to check? My older brother was enraged, driving full speed towards the house. But what we would find there, no one had expected. When we arrived, we saw my mother-in-law happily feeding Amir. Yes, people. She was feeding on him. They were laughing and seemed to be having the time of their lives. My brothers saw this and got so angry that they got out of the car and walked towards the house together. I had to stay in the car, but I was so weakened that the tension made me faint again. My mother stayed with me, and through tears, I heard her say, "What have they done to my child?" My brothers and father entered the house, and after more than half an hour, the front door opened, and Amir ran towards the car like a mad bull. My brother chased after him, and Amir shouted that if anyone took me away from him, he would cut me into pieces. Then, my father stormed out of the house, yelling that my in-laws were demons and that we needed to leave. We had nothing more to find there. Those were his last words before getting into the car. My older brother gave Amir a hard slap, causing him to fall to the ground. My brother leaned over Amir and said, "You forgot that we're still alive. Dare to approach Shantal again, and your end will be near." At the same moment, my mother ran out of the house, jumping over Amir. She told him that they were taking me and that they would file charges for confinement and abuse with the police. She also shouted that he should get a lawyer quickly for the divorce. After that, my brothers got into the car and we drove away. Little did we know that the worst was yet to come, but I'll gladly tell you about it in the next part of this story.